Okay, so Kant. Immanuel Kant was born in 1724, died 1804, and his philosophy, his moral philosophy, and his entire career as philosophy actually, is deeply impacted by David Hume. Right? It was upon reading David Hume's A Treatise of Human Nature that Kant says of himself that he was awakened from my dogmatic slumber and began doing philosophy. In addition to Hume, who he was reacting against, Kant was very, very deeply impacted by his own strict, almost Calvinist upbringing, and by his parents. Right? And he was a very, very firm believer in God and Christianity in some of the strictest sense, and in particular in moral realism, the moral realism of Christianity, the idea that there are absolute rights and wrongs. But in reacting against Hume, he had to sort of move away from Christian explanations to come up with a solid philosophical explanation for both how the mind worked and how this could lead us to having universal moral principles of right and wrong that weren't the result of moral sentiments growing into generally applied principles, which led to his deontological ethics. Now, deontology is the form of ethics that says the action is the only thing that matters in determining moral worth, right? In determining whether something is right or wrong. So we don't pay any attention to the consequences as a result. Right? The word deontology comes from the Greek die, and a meaning needed, which is conjugated forms deont, meaning being necessary, right? And as a whole, deontology is an ethical theory based off of principles that focus on obligations towards others. Right? So the idea is that if a deontological ethics says that something is wrong, then you are obliged to not do it, right? And if it says that something is right, then it's obligatory for you to do it in order for you to be a moral individual. Right? So this makes Kant a moral realist, just the same as Christianity is a deontological ethics. And that's pretty much Kant's major accomplishment, is taking the deontological ethics that was so central to Christianity and decentralizing the Christian aspect without having to do away with God. But that's another point. That's something else entirely. So, for Kant, you have to understand his magnum opus, his great works, are 3 individual books which each respond in some way, shape, or form to the 3 parts of Hume's Treatise of Human Nature. Right? The first critique, Kant's first critique, and that's what his magnum opus are called, are the critiques collectively. So the first critique is the critique of pure reason, and criticizes book 1 of, or the first third of Hume's Treatise of Human Nature, which focuses on epistemology and metaphysics, right? How the mind works. So the critique of pure reason is Kant's answer to Hume's own proposed theory of mind. And then the second book, the critique of practical reason, is the outgrowth of ethics that comes from the critique of pure reason, showing how we can, through logic and logic alone, get to sound ethical and moral principles. And then finally, the critique of judgment has to do with things like critique of art, aesthetics, social judgments, and adds a bit of more nuance to moral judgments too. Specifically, where emotion plays into our moral judgments. For Kant, that's a secondary issue, right? Morality, first and foremost, is just determined by the action. And in this regard, for as far as he's concerned, morality is determined by two things in particular: that an action is universalizable in essence, right? For something to be moral, it has to be something that all people in all times in all places can do, that we can will it to be a universal action without self-contradiction, right? If the principle of action that I want to commit turns on itself when we universalize it in this way, then it is an immoral action. If, however, it maintains consistency in a universal form, like in the form of a general rule, then it is a moral action. Right? So for something to be moral, it must be moral at any and all times, right? In any and all places, across any and all peoples. And this demarks the difference between right and wrong, the fundamental difference, which we can break down into two further sort of categories, or two further elements. This shows that morality is categorical. That is to say, it's not dependent on anything other than outside of itself, even God, right? So in this case, the Christian resolution would be of this idea would be that God says that something is right or wrong because it's right or wrong. He knows it's right or wrong. It's not right or wrong because he wills it, but his omniscience lets him know that it is, and he's just being a nice guy and communicating it to us. Right? So that would be the sense of categorical, that it's not even dependent upon God, but God can let us know, right? If you want to try and reconcile this with Christianity. And then secondly, that morality is determinable a priori. Right? And remember, a priori means before experience. So we can sit and think things through logically and come to the correct moral conclusions. Right? So it's capable of being known through logical reasoning alone, without necessarily experiencing things. And together, these two things form the focus of Kant's entire theory, which is called the categorical imperative.